Hello, we welcome you to the Beacon Salon Speaker Series. In its fourth year, the Beacon Salon Speaker Series at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, is the institution's flagship community education outreach program. The series channels its ethos from the French salons during the Enlightenment. Citizens of all social classes and genders would gather not to wash and cut, but to comb through intellectual ideas. This installment, the Negro Baseball Leagues, An American Legacy, promises to do just that. But first, some background from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. When racism and Jim Crow laws forced African Americans from professional teams with white players by 1900, black players formed their own units, barnstorming around the country to play anyone who would challenge them. In 1920, an organized league structure was formed under the guidance of Andrew Rube Foster, a former player, manager, and owner of the Chicago American Giants. In a meeting held at the Paseo YMCA in Kansas City, Missouri, Foster and a few other Midwestern team owners joined to form the Negro National League. Soon, rival leagues formed in eastern and southern states, bringing in the thrills and innovative play of black baseball to major urban centers around the United States, Canada, and Latin America. We'll hear more from our guest, Byron Motley. Motley has worked on Broadway, published Embracing Cuba, a book of essays with his photographs, and released his jazz CD, Jazz and Cocktails. This presentation is based on his father's memoir, Ruling Over Monarchs, Giants and Stars, True Tales of Breaking Barriers, Umpiring Baseball Legends, and Wild Adventures in the Negro Leagues, which Motley co-authored as well as produced a short documentary. Please stay with us after the lecture for a Zoom webinar where you can ask Mr. Motley questions. There's still time to register for the webinar. Visit beaconcollege.edu. And now, the Beacon Salon Speaker Series is honored to welcome Byron Motley.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today to talk about a subject matter that is very near and dear to my heart, the Negro Baseball Leagues. Now, in the time that we have allotted together today, there is no way I could give you the full story about what it was to be a part of the Negro Leagues, because there's just too many stories to tell. We would be here all night and all day long to talk about a 100-year history. So what I'm going to do is give you some highlights of what I think are some of the most interesting and fascinating and eye-opening aspects of Negro League history. And in a little while, I'm going to show you a short film clip of a work-in-progress documentary that I'm currently producing on the Negro Leagues. And what's most exciting about doing this lecture for you today is that this is the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. 2020 is when the Negro Leagues were founded. And this year is so exciting that we're doing things to honor the Negro Leagues. A lot of events have been planned to take place at this time, but because of the pandemic, a lot of those events have been pushed back to 2021. But recently, Major League Baseball, actually on August 16th of this year, claimed that day to be Negro League Day, in which every player, manager, and coach, and the umpires wore a centennial patch in honor of the Negro Leagues. It's a very special and very wonderful thing to see that take place in the major leagues. Every team did it, broadcast all over every imaginable network. So it was great to see that the leagues were honored in that way. So why the Negro Leagues? What is so important about the Negro Leagues to me? Well, for me, my family connection goes through my father. And I always like to say that long before Michael Jordan became known as Air Jordan, my father, Bob Motley, should have been called Air Motley. Yep, that's him up there in the sky at a Negro League game in 1949, calling the runner out at first base. My father actually umpired in the Negro Leagues from 1947 until the leagues disbanded in 1960. So he had a long career in the Negro Leagues. He traveled the country, calling balls and strikes, and some of the greatest players to ever put on a baseball uniform, including a few names you may have heard of, like Satchel Paige, Willie Mays, Ernie Banks, Hank Aaron. And the player my father said was probably the greatest athlete he ever saw play in the Negro Leagues, a guy by the name of Willard Brown. Most people don't know that name, Willard Brown, but Willard Brown actually became a Hall of Famer several years ago. My father recently passed away 3 years ago, but up until that time, he was the last surviving umpire from the Negro Leagues. And as a boy, I recall that every few months, my father would go down memory lane and start talking about his days umpiring in the Negro Leagues or his days he spent as a World War II veteran. And I would just shake my head and say, oh my God, here he goes again, the stories, these stories. But as I got to be older, I realized the treasure trove of his life and these stories and what he had lived through and what he had to tell. So in 2007, he and I collaborated on his memoir, which was aptly called Ruling Over Monarchs, Giants, and Stars. And in that book, my father talks about his life in the Negro Leagues, and he also talks about the days he spent in World War II as one of the first Black Marines in our country. And it's a great book, I'd like to think and say, because it really gives you an outside look at the Negro Leagues from another perspective. Not from a player's perspective, not from an owner's perspective, but from the umpire. And what most people don't realize is that the umpire is the one that controls the game. He's the one that's in charge of the game. And the game is not official unless there's an umpire in the field. So it really is a great insight into this great history. And I'm pleased and excited that in a few months, actually in November, the 100th anniversary edition of the book is coming out. Different title, as you see, from the Ruling Over Monarchs, Giants, and Stars. It's now going to be called the Negro Baseball Leagues with a subtitle reflecting my father being an umpire. So keep your eyes and ears open for that to come in a few months as well. Now, some of you might be wondering, what does Negro Leagues have to do with where I live and here in Florida, in Leesburg, Florida of all places? There's no Negro League baseball history here. I bet if you went back and did some research and some of the old, went to a library or looked at some of the old microfilm or microfiche, I bet you would find evidence that Negro League teams came right through this area back in the day and did what was called barnstorming. Many of the teams would pair up with other teams and go around the country and barnstorm in smaller cities to make more money and to spread the word and to let people see how great they were playing the games. So if you went back and did some research, you might find evidence that one of these teams actually came through this area back in the 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or even in the 60s. And they did this thing called barnstorming once again. Now, you'll see some of these team names on the screen that just a few of the teams that came and went in that 40-year history of the Negro Leagues. And there are some interesting team names like the New York Black Yankees and the Birmingham Black Barons, the Baltimore Black Sox, and my favorite team name, the Atlanta Black Crackers. And there was another team called the Washington Black Senators. So what you can tell is that a lot of these teams adapted the logo or the mascot name of a major or minor league team, and they put the word black in front of it to denote the difference between the all-black major league team or minor league team, and of course the Negro League team as well. And also at the top middle of the screen, you'll see a team name called the New York Cubans. Well, that was a team made up primarily of Latin American players who came from countries from Latin America like Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Venezuela. Those guys could not play in the major leagues as well, but they could find a home playing in the Negro Leagues. So there was quite a few teams that had a smattering of Latin American players throughout the Negro Leagues. So a lot of people argue today, well, the numbers are down in the major leagues of black players playing in the majors. I always remind them that every Latin American player who is now in the majors, they are byproducts of the Negro Leagues because they played in that league, their predecessors. Now, on the right side of the screen toward the bottom, you'll see a jersey that says House of David. Well, that was an all-white team that played in the Negro Leagues. They were part of a religious sect out of Benton Harbor, Michigan. And the religion was called the House of David, was some offshoot religion. And these guys, their identity was their long hairs and long beards. And they would actually pair up with black teams, and they would travel around the country, and they would make more money for themselves and for their religious sect. And they became an integral part of what the Negro Leagues were all about. See, the Negro Leagues were an equal opportunity employer before that became a thing. They employed white players, they employed Latin American players, and of course black players. So people came together at that time to play this game that they all loved, which was baseball. Now the House of David team were kind of like a showy team. They did things like playing baseballs on mules and donkeys. They also played a thing called pepper ball and shadow ball, which is a way of playing the game with just motion and mimicking. And so they did all those kind of things to entertain the crowds and the fans at their games. So that was a very fun part of the Negro Leagues as well. There was also a team called the Indianapolis Clowns. And they were a team that were competitive. They played competitive baseball, but they also did clowning things like the House of David team to entertain the fans. And they got the fans and the kids got a kick out of these players. You'll see the players here had the oversized gloves and the bats. And now during the game, they wouldn't play with those items, but they would do things before a game or between a doubleheader. Or sometimes the first baseman would bring out that big mitt and try to fool the umpires and some of the players that he had caught the ball when he really hadn't. But that was things that entertained the fans. Like I said, the kids loved it. And if you've ever seen the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team, the Indianapolis Clowns were much like the Harlem Globetrotters, doing those crazy antics and having fun and just being outrageous. But you can tell they were competitive ball players and they knew how to play the game for real. And if you don't think that the Indianapolis Clowns were a great team and had great players, well, know this. This guy, Hank Aaron, the home run slugger, who is one of the greatest players of all times, came from the Indianapolis Clowns. He played with them in 1951 and was scouted by the majors and eventually went on to become a superstar player and one of the greatest players of all times. His nickname was Pork Chops, because that's all he would eat. He loved pork chops. So a lot of these Negro League teams and players had nicknames for each other, and Hank Aaron, that was his nickname because that's all he loved to eat at that time. Now, earlier in the lecture, you saw my jersey that says Monarchs. And the reason I wear this jersey is because I like to feature the team that this jersey represents, which are the Kansas City Monarchs. And there's many reasons for my love and respect of the Monarchs. And starting with, it was my hometown team. Now, I was born too late to see Negro League baseball, but even growing up after the Negro Leagues had come and gone, I heard a lot of stories about the Negro Leagues, about these Kansas City Monarchs, not only from my dad, but other people I knew. And the Monarchs were the most dominant franchise of the Negro Leagues at that time. They were one of the original teams that was founded in 1920, and they were one of the last teams to disband in 1960. And one player actually told me that the Monarchs made Kansas City the talk of the town all over the world. They were a team that had superstars. Today, of all of the Hall of Famers who are in the Baseball Hall of Fame, most of the players came from this team, the Kansas City Monarchs. Now, they paid some of the highest salaries, they had some of the best players. They were a dominant franchise. Another reason I like to talk about the Monarchs in my lecture is because they were one of the first teams to play a baseball game at night. Their owner, J.L. Wilkinson, who was one of the few white owners of a Negro League team at that time, came up with the bright idea as a way to play a baseball game at night that he and his team could make more money. So as you see here on the screen, on the right side of the screen, there is a trailer truck with a lighting system installed. And it looks kind of archaic now to us, but back then that was state of the art. And they had 5 or 6 of these trucks, and those lights would crank up. They were heavy, big, heavy lights, but they would crank up, and he would place 5 or 6 of these around the baseball field, and they were gas lit. and it was just enough light to give a hue to the baseball, and the minors caught on. And think about it today. Predominantly, most games in the majors and minors are played at night. Now, 75% of those games are played in the evening, and that is a first to come out of Negro League baseball. And as I go along a little bit further, I'm going to tell you a few more firsts to come out of Negro League baseball. But that's a very important one there, night baseball. Another reason I feature the Monarchs in my lecture is because of this man, Jackie Robinson, who played for 1 year with the Kansas City Monarchs before being drafted and called up to the majors. He was the man who broke the color barrier in the 20th century. And after a series of protests by Paul Robeson and the black press at the time and the American Communist Party, they led the fight for integration into baseball. Now, during my many conversations with numerous Negro League players throughout the years, they all tell me that Jackie was chosen, he was picked with purpose. He wasn't the best player the Negro Leagues had to offer, but he had the right temperament. He was college educated, he had served in the military, he had grown up in California, so he had been acclimated to being in a somewhat integrated society. So he was the perfect man for the job. And as we all know, although he may not have been the greatest player from the Negro Leagues to go up, he certainly made a great impact and became an icon in our culture. But Jackie was not the first black to actually play Major League Baseball. And it's a little trick question because it happened long before Jackie, 60 years before him, with a man named Moses Fleetwood Walker, who played for 1 year at the Major League level at that time with the Toledo Club in 1886. But there was so much racial tension in the country at that time that there were people who did not like the fact that this black man was playing alongside these white men. So after that 1 year, Moses Fleetwood Walker was kicked off the Major League Baseball diamond, and not another black would play until Jackie, some 60 years later. But Moses Fleetwood Walker was kind of like Jackie. He also was a highly educated man. He had served in the military. He had lived in a somewhat integrated society at that time as well. And so they were much alike. But what's one thing that's strikingly different about Moses Fleetwood Walker and Jackie Robinson is that Moses was a catcher. But he was not only just a catcher, he was a bare-handed catcher. So can you imagine us today asking one of our multi-million-dollar players to catch a ball barehanded? That wouldn't happen, would it? Certainly would not. So you could argue that Moses Fleetwood Walker, he played at a time when a man was really a man. Now, the father of the Negro Leagues is this gentleman, Andrew Rube Foster, who was a talented ball player in his own right. But when he got to be a little bit older, he had lost some of that spark as a player, but he still loved the game so much that he wanted to create an official league for his friends who were these great athletes to have their own league to play in. So in 1920, 100 years ago, he got together with some of the other owners of these independent teams, once again in my hometown of Kansas City, and they created what was known as the Negro National League. Now, because of his vision, Andrew Rube Foster was thinking expansion at that time. He had the nerve, the gall to think that if he created this new Negro League, that the major leagues would take an all-white, that the American League and the majors would take an all-black Negro League team, and that they would also take one in the National League. That he thought he was going to integrate this Major League Baseball at that time. Of course, that did not happen, but what he created was something quite outstanding. It was an outlet for players of color to play the great game of baseball, which they loved as well. At that historic meeting in 1920, these are some of the teams that were founded. As you see, they came from around the country, mostly in the Midwest. And they created what became a great, great expansion and a great, great league at that time. Now, the motto of the Negro Leagues was, "We are the ship, all else the sea." which basically says there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. And what these men did accomplish at that time became the third largest black-owned business enterprise at that time. So Andrew Foster, he is undisputed one of the greatest minds, one of the greatest figures in baseball history, undisputed. The Negro Leagues were not the minor leagues. Oh no, they were the majors for blacks who were cut off from mainstream baseball. So what is so special, and why is there such a renaissance of history and interest in the Negro Leagues now? And why should their memory be kept alive? I'd like to say that it's because they paved the way for all of us. Whether or not you like baseball or not, these men and women unknowingly impacted our lives and the freedoms that we have now and that we're fighting to keep now as well. They didn't have the freedoms we have. They did things, they sacrificed their lives, they sacrificed their passions to do the game they loved, just to play a simple game of baseball. In an era now where I think the average major league salary is somewhere like $1.5 million, these men played simply for the love of the game. The average Negro League salary was somewhere about $300, $400 a month, but during the off season, they had to work regular jobs as taxi drivers or in factories or bartenders, whatever they had to do to sustain a livelihood for them and their families. Unlike the players today who make millions of dollars and only have to be ball players, these men really played simply for the love of the game. Because of its profound cultural, social, and political and economical impact, the story of the Negro Leagues goes far beyond the baseball diamonds. It's really a story about men and women who simply wanted to play the game, but were ostracized simply because of their skin color. It also reflects the fabric of society and the American civil rights movement and how that journey came out of these leagues. You could even argue that the signing of Jackie Robinson to that major league contract in 1945 was the beginning of the modern day civil rights movement. It was before Brown versus the Board of Education. It was before Rosa Parks said, "Ooh, I'm tired today, I ain't going to the back of that bus." And Martin Luther King was only a sophomore at Morehouse when Jackie signed that historic contract. So you see how important that one event was for the beginning of what became known as the modern day civil rights movement. Now I want to share with you a few other facts about the Negro Leagues. During their heyday, the Negro Leagues became the third largest black-owned business enterprise. First were the black-owned insurance companies who took care of and insured the lives and stocks of black Americans all across the country. Number two was a woman you may have heard of, Madam C.J. Walker, who had a line of skincare products that were very important for women who, can we edit? Okay. What should I go back to?
What?
Should I just continue?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, go back one.
Okay.
One slide. Go ahead.
Okay. I want to share with you a few other facts about the Negro Leagues. As I told you already, they were the third largest black-owned business enterprise in America. First were the black-owned insurance companies that insured the crops, stocks, and lives of black Americans all across the country. And this is a list of some of the most famous and most well-known and successful insurance companies at that time. Number two was a woman that you may have heard of, Madam C.J. Walker, who had a school of cosmetology in every principal city in America. She had a hugely successful line of hair care products for black women. And she made a fortune. She made a fortune back at that time. She was arguably the first woman in this country who actually ever earned over $1 million. And she left a great legacy for women of color to rise to that. Now, 40% of Negro League players were college-educated men. These weren't just your typical jocks. These were men who valued their education, and it's pretty incredible that a lot of times they would, when the Negro League teams had their spring training, they would do that at historical black colleges in the South, and many times they found players from those colleges and would take them out on the road with them during the summer to make money and to play the game. Negro League players were also the first to take baseball to Japan. Now, Babe Ruth and his All-Stars are credited with that feat, but it is well documented that Negro League players went to Japan 3 or 4 years before Babe Ruth. So you can even argue with the influx of players from Japan and other countries from that part of the world that they too are byproducts of Negro League baseball. Negro League players also invented the batting helmet and the shin guards. Now, in the Negro Leagues, the style of play was a lot more competitive, and they were out to prove that they were the best players. So if you got a base hit your first time up at bat, and God forbid you had gotten a home run, the next time you came to bat, it was guaranteed the ball was going to be thrown directly at your head. And that was called the brushback. It was not a dirty way of playing, it's just the way those guys played back then. They played for keeps. They were playing to show they were the best to ever play the game. So one player had gotten knocked down way too many times and wanted to protect his head. So on his way to a game once, he saw an old coal miner's hat on the side of a road and thought, oh, that's a hard object. If I put that on top of my head and took that little light thing off the top, that might protect me. Everybody thought he was nuts, but it caught on. And now you know that from Little League upward, nobody steps into a batting box without putting first on their head a batting helmet. And that's a first to come out of Negro League baseball. Negro League players also invented the shin guards, because back then in the 20s and 30s, there was no such thing. So also during a game or before a game, the Negro League players, they wore those old spikes, those really tough, hard spikes. And they would sharpen those to make them as sharp as they could. So when they slid into a bag, they went in with a purpose, with cutting up anything and everything standing in its way. So players are getting tired of getting cut up and bleeding and tearing up their uniforms. So one player got the great idea to get some old wooden boards and he strapped those around his legs. And that became baseball's first shin guards. And as I told you already, they were the first to play baseball games at night. And when they barnstormed and played exhibition games against the all-white major league teams at that time, it is well documented that Negro League teams won far more than they lost. Now, I don't know how many of you might be music lovers, especially old-time music from back in the 30s and 40s, but those of you who know that era and the music, you'll be interested to learn that there were 3 entertainers who owned Negro League baseball teams. Bill Bo Jangles Robinson, the famous tap dancer from back in the day, was a owner of the New York Black Yankees franchise. And it is said that when he attended games, especially a doubleheader, that he would actually get on top of the dugout and tap dance in between innings to entertain the fans. That must have been a blast. Louis Armstrong, known as Satchmo, had his own team, and he loved baseball. And he would actually pay his players extra when they got base hits and home runs. And one player told me once that Satchmo would yell out, "Y'all better do something besides look pretty out there in that field. I want to get some hits. I want to get some runs." And when they did, he paid them extra. And here's a photograph of Louis with his team that was based in New Orleans, and they traveled around and they were a fun team. They probably weren't the greatest players, but I'm sure they had a great time out there in the field because I think most of them were made up of musicians. And I know that this guy, Cab Calloway, his team definitely was more made up of players, of musicians. And it is said that his team was more concerned about how well they would score off the field as opposed to on the field, if you know what I mean. And I love the fact that there were 3 women who played in the Negro Leagues: Toni Stone, Connie Morgan, and Mamie Peanut Johnson, who took a page from the Jackie Robinson Songbook of History and created their own by breaking down the Negro Leagues gender barrier. Now, some say that these women were used as a gimmick to attract crowds once Jackie and some of the other great players from the Negro Leagues started to go up to the major leagues in the 1950s. Others say, no. These were some great athletes and they held their own out there in that field. But you know, no matter what they were, they should always be respected for their contribution to not only baseball, but to the world of sports in general. I mean, where were the likes of Venus and Serena and some of these other great athletes, the women of the WNBA and tennis, where would they be out without the shoulders of these women to stand on? Toni Stone was the first to sign and come up with the Indianapolis Clowns in the 1950s, in 1952 to be exact. And recently there was a play on Broadway that you may have heard about called Toni Stone. And it was based on her life. And I didn't see it personally, but it got great reviews, and who knows, it might go to Broadway eventually, but it's really great that they honor her with a play. And again, the Indianapolis Clowns were known as a team of showmanship, that they did things before a game to entertain the fans, and she participated in that. But also, it's kind of interesting is that when she became a member of the Indianapolis Clowns, the person she replaced at second base was a young Hank Aaron. Interesting, huh? Mamie Peanut Johnson was the last player, female player, to just passed away really not long ago, a couple of years ago. And I got a chance to meet her and interview her at her home several years ago. And I want to play a little short film clip of her talking about what it felt to be a player in the Negro Leagues and how important that was for her.
I went to try out for the Women's White League, and they looked at me like I was crazy, as if to say, what do you want? But I'm so happy today that they did turn me down, honey, because I would be just another lady or just another girl or whatever you might want to say that was a ball player.
My friend Mamie Peanut Johnson, and like I said, she just passed away recently, and I miss her, and all of us in the Negro League community miss her. She was a very special lady. But that's a great little film clip to show you how much that league meant to her. And she made history, and should never be forgotten with what she gave to the leagues, as well as the other two ladies. Now, I could talk to you all day about some of these great players and athletes that came out of the Negro Leagues, but today I'm going to concentrate on three of the most renowned, famous, and really interesting players to play in the Negro Leagues, starting with the legendary pitcher himself, Mr. Leroy Satchel Paige. Oh yeah, the long, lanky phenom with the big feet. He is by far the most recognizable figure in black baseball history for decades. His name drew crowds from all around the country. And by all accounts, he was the highest paid player of his time, black or white. He earned about $30,000 to $40,000 a year, which back then was a lot of money. He was probably the only player outside of Babe Ruth who only played baseball. He didn't have a regular job after the season was over. He was a baseball player because he made the most money. Not only would he get a percentage of the gate at every game, he also got a salary. So he knew his value, and he demanded top dollar, and he got top dollar. Satchel was also known for his poetic-like wit and wisdom. And some of his more infamous quips are, "Avoid fried meats, which angry up the blood. Ain't no man can avoid being average, but ain't no man got to be common. Age is a question of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. And don't look back. Something might be gaining on you." Now, Satchel Paige was famous, and Satchel Paige is still famous. As I said, he was the highest paid player of his time. He basically invented what's called the free agency, where a player will hop from team to team to team, and who's ever paying the most money, that's who he's playing with. That's what Satchel was doing back in the 20s and the 30s. So he created this thing called free agency. And there he is standing with his private plane. Say for instance, he were here tonight in Leesburg, and he got a telegram saying, well, we need you here in Miami tomorrow pitching for us for another team. Well, Satchel was either driving his Cadillac, taking the train, or flying that private plane to the next gig. He believed in making top dollar, and he did. It's incredible to think about how popular and how what a phenomenon he must have been. My father, who umpired many games of Satchel, so I once asked my father, I said, what was it like to be behind the plate and call balls and strikes on the great Satchel Paige? And he would just look at me, he'd laugh, he says, you've never seen anything like it. He said, it seemed like when Satchel threw, he said he threw so hard that the ball seemed to hum up to the plate. He said, it sounded like a swarm of bees coming at you. He said, if you blinked your eye, he says, there's no way in hell you're going to catch up, back up with that ball. That's how hard Satchel threw. He said also that back then the catchers didn't have the equipment like they have today. So the catchers would use like sponges or newspaper, even sometimes like straw or even meat to protect their hands underneath the glove as extra padding. And he said that after a game, he says he would sometimes just see the catcher's mitt just gnarly and just messed up from Satchel throwing so hard. He said also Satchel threw so hard that many times when the catcher caught the ball, that he would actually fall back into my father and be like, ugh, because that's how hard Satchel threw. He also said that Satchel got mad at him once because my father called a ball, which Satchel thought should have been a strike. And he said the next ball that the Satchel threw, instead of the catcher having the glove here, right before they got to the mitt, he dropped the glove. The ball went smack into my father's face. That's how they played back then. They weren't out, they were competitive. And if they didn't like the call, they made you pay for it. But Satchel was really a phenomenal pitcher. And he had a whole arsenal of other pitches that he had. He had a standard fastball, he had a standard curveball, but he had a few others he had some interesting nicknames for. For instance, he had the Midnight Creeper, the 4-Day Rider, the Wobbly Ball, the Trouble Ball, the Bat Dodger, the Step and Pitch It Ball, the Whipsy Dipsy Do Ball, the Nothing Ball. And he had one called, his famous pitch was called the Hesitation Pitch that seemed to slow up and then go. And he had one other he called his B-Ball. And he was once asked, Satch, why do you call that why is that called the B-Ball? And Satchel was a very arrogant and confident player, so he knew he was the best. So, Satch, why do you call that your B-Ball? His reply was, because it bees where I throws it. So Satchel Paige has one distinction in Major League history, and that is that he became the oldest rookie to play in the majors. In 1948, he was finally called up to the Cleveland Indians, and that was the last time the Indians won the World Series. And Satchel was approximately 42 years old at the time, but in that half a season with the Indians, his record was 6-1, and he helped the Indians win the World Series that year. At the age of approximately 59, because nobody really knew what his age was, he was invited back by the then Kansas City Athletics, who are now the Oakland Athletics, to pitch 3 innings of game to get his Major League pension. In that game, at the age of approximately 59, Satchel Paige pitched 3 shutout innings and gave up only 1 hit. And that was to future Hall of Famer Carl Yastrzemski. So if he were doing that at age 59, you can imagine what he was doing when he was in his prime, in his teens and early 20s. He must have been unhittable. Well, he was. Everybody said he was. He was the great Leroy Satchel Paige. The home run slugger from the Negro Leagues was Josh Gibson. He is the only man that we know of to ever hit a ball completely out of Yankee Stadium. Not even the great Babe Ruth did that. Josh was a jovial person, as you can see from this photograph. He loved children, he had a great personality, but unfortunately he never made it to the majors. He died relatively young at the age of 36. Some say he died of depression or mental illness that was not detected at that time. Others say that he died of a broken heart after Jackie signed that contract, because he knew that, because he was older, he might not still make it to the majors. So there's a bittersweet story about the legacy of this man. Unfortunately, records were not kept accurately in the Negro Leagues, but it is said that during his career, that Josh Gibson hit close to 1,000, if not more, home runs. Now that's more than Babe Ruth, more than Hank Aaron, more than Barry Bonds. It is also estimated that he hit more than 90 home runs in one season. Again, more than Barry Bonds, more than Willie Mays, more than Mark McGwire, more than Sammy Sosa. And one thing we do know about Josh Gibson, he was juiced up. Leroy, oh, sorry, cut that. So after that, cut to Papa Bell. They say he was so fast, he could turn off the lights and be in bed before the room went dark. Now that's fast. He was once clocked running the base paths from home all the way back around home in under 12 seconds. The great runner Jesse Owens, who became known as the fastest man in the world after the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, was a big fan of Negro League baseball and would often go to games and put on exhibitions for the fans before a game or between a doubleheader. And one thing he loved to do was to race against a racehorse. So Jesse Owens would get together with a racehorse and he'd run backwards where the racehorse would run forward, and he would outrun the horse. But as fast as Jesse Owens was, he refused to race Cool Papa Bell. They said that Cool Papa would just stand on a bag with no lead off, just stand there and take off in flight and just go around the base path so fast it would just boggle your mind. He basically revolutionized what we know as base stealing. And again, records were not kept in the Negro Leagues like they should have been, because these guys didn't realize they were making and creating history. They just wanted to play a baseball game. But I would compare him to a modern day Rickey Henderson. And had records been kept, I'm sure that his stats would be right up there alongside the great Hall of Famers like Rickey Henderson and Lou Brock. Now, was she black or was she white? This is Effa Manley, one of the most extraordinary women in sports history. She is the first woman ever to own, run, and sometimes manage a professional sports team. Along with her husband, Abe, they co-owned the Newark Eagles, and she ran that team with kid gloves. She was concerned about how her players behaved both on and off the field. She made sure they invested in properties. She wanted them to have a career after baseball, a life after baseball. So she was very much involved with her team. And some say she was a genius in her business dealings. She also was the first woman, or the first owner, that after Jackie Robinson was stolen from the Negro Leagues, she was the first owner to stand up to the white major league owners and demand compensation for her players and for other owners. And so she was an incredible lady, gave so much to what the Negro Leagues were about, and helped that entity grow into be the third largest black-owned business at the time because of her business acumen. Now, several years ago, you may have heard about Effa Manley in the press, in that she became the first and only woman inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. I think that honor is a perfect honor for her, because there's no other woman in the history of baseball sport who has done what this woman has done. I found her story to be so fascinating, and I wrote a screenplay based on her life, and we're in negotiations now. Hopefully in a year or so, you're going to hear more about that project coming up, about Effa Manley and her Newark Eagles. And I asked you early on, when you saw that photograph of her, was she black or was she white? Well, she claimed at the end of her life that she was a white woman. And all through the years, everybody thought she was black, everybody thought she was white. It was always argued. Nobody knew what she was. But she claimed that she was actually a white woman. Well, further research has uncovered that she was probably biracial. What that biracial part was, we don't know if it was African American, Indian, or what. But it looks like she was actually of biracial descent. But no matter what she was, she loved the game, her players loved her, and she was probably one of the most remarkable figures to come out of Negro League history. I want to tell you a few other things about what you can find about the Negro Leagues. There was a stamp put out several years ago by the post office that featured the Negro Leagues. On the right of the stamp is the father of Negro League baseball, Rube Foster. And on the left side, with the arm stretched out far like an eagle, is based on my father, the Negro League umpire. And if you're a stamp collector and don't have this in your collection, I'm sure you can find it on the internet or have it for a keepsake. And I also want to let you know about the Negro League Baseball Museum, which is in Kansas City, Missouri. It is the only museum in the country that honors and focuses on the history of the Negro Leagues. It's a wonderful place. If you ever get to the Negro Leagues, the museum, make sure you go and visit and spend some time there and enjoy the artifacts, enjoy learning more about this history. And while you're there, in the middle of the museum is an exhibit called The Field of Legends, which features 11 statues of former Hall of Famers. But they added recently the umpire, and there he is behind home plate in his position there. That's my father's statue there at the Negro League Museum. And again, it's a wonderful museum. Right next door is the American Jazz Musician. The American Jazz Museum is right next door. And so you go to the Negro League Baseball Museum, you learn about the baseball in the city at the time. You go next door to learn about the jazz, and you walk down the street about 2 blocks to get some great Kansas City barbecue at Brian's Barbecue. So you get the 3 greatest things that come out of Kansas City. So a couple more statues there of my dad. I'm very proud that that statue is there now to be immortalized for all time. And I'm currently producing a documentary about the Negro Leagues. Right now, the working title is The League. And I'm going to show you a short film clip of that and let you check that out for a few minutes and then come back and wrap this up for you. So enjoy a little bit of seeing the Work in Progress documentary that will hopefully be on the air next year, 2021, to continue the celebration of the Negro Leagues. And here we go.
The greatest American story has yet to be told.
We were awesome. You never seen anything like it.
There has been nothing like the Negro Leagues since.
We had a hell of a league.
A 60-year ban barred players of color from playing Major League Baseball.
There was no room for Negroes and white in baseball.
The powers that be clamped a Jim Crow ban on the game and fought like hell to keep it.
But in 1920, a group of pioneering black businessmen, against all odds, created something of their own.
The Major Leagues were the Negro League to me.
And this black organization, it represented everything to black people at the time.
It was great theater seeing the Negro Leagues play.
They were our big league. It was a very big day. You were going to the game.
Word spread, and it became a symbol of pride in America's black communities.
People would say, "Did you hear about the league?" And you always knew that they meant the Negro Baseball League.
The leagues grew to become America's 3rd largest black-owned business enterprise, far outdrawing the majors. But the realities of the day were Jim Crow and a fight for respect and recognition.
We were denied so many other things, so many opportunities, schooling, everything imaginable.
Chief of police was the manager. He come over to our dugout and said, if you niggas beat us, we're gonna run you out of town.
If you had to go to a bathroom, you know you had to go in certain ways.
I didn't say remove ridiculous, ignorant racism. I just said give me the strength to live it and still play ball.
I haven't seen anyone yet that had to control Satchel Paige yet. That's black or white.
Satch could call in the whole team and strike everybody out. You know, I saw that. He could call them all in, strike everybody out.
Before the ball ever got to me, he says, go sit down. And it might have scared me because I didn't swing.
I've never seen nobody in my 70-some years in baseball attack the ball like Josh Gibson. He was a brute.
At bat, he was nothing less than a right-handed hitting Babe Ruth.
He hit his ball through the infield so hard that the breeze almost knocked it down.
Eleanor Roosevelt began to speak out. Not Franklin, Eleanor. Here were black soldiers beginning to fight and die for their country, and yet they can't play baseball?
Robinson waits. Here comes the pitch, and there goes a line drive to left field.
When Jackie Robinson made it to the Dodgers, among those of us who were sensitive to the civil rights issues, there was absolute exultation.
It looked like it was a Hollywood script. It looked like every time he had to come through, he did. So when he went out there, he was us.
That gave not only me, but other black ball players a chance to show their talent.
It had a wider scope to it than just talking about baseball.
Jackie Robinson hit that ball. He hit it, yes, and that ain't all. He stole home.
Jackie changed people. The whole dynamics of America changed.
Oh, I've got a drop that'll make you swing down low. I've got a drop that'll make you swing.
I'll live forever. Somebody will always learn about me.
Segregation was a horrible thing, really. You're going to help change these things, telling these stories.
To you, when I wind up pitching my all to you. So get your bat ready, baby. Let's see what you can do. Get your bat ready, baby. Get a bat ready, baby. Get your bat ready, baby. Get your bat ready, baby. Get your bat ready, baby. Let's have some fun. If you can hit that ball, you can make a home run.
So I certainly hope you enjoyed that short clip there, that work in progress documentary, and make sure you keep your eyes and ears open next year for the official broadcast of that on some major network soon to come in 2021. And again, this is the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues, and the exciting time. It's an honor to share this information with you today and to tell you about these stories. So there are a couple of ways where you can get involved in helping to celebrate this centennial of the Negro Leagues. One way is with the Tip of the Cap campaign, which is going on now on the internet. You just take a photograph of yourself, tip your cap, send it into the website, and they'll put you up on the website, and you'll be a part of this campaign. It's really been a lot of fun. I got to do one, and as you see, some of the former presidents were also participated, as well as many great athletes and some other renowned entertainers as well. And a little shameless plug here, another way that you can also honor Negro League history right now is my father's swag. A company just put out a line of apparel featuring my father jumping up in the air, calling the runner out at first base again, his iconic photograph. And you can promote that, or you can pick some of those items up as well. And also don't forget the re-release of my father's book, coming out in November of this year, celebrating his life and his legacy in the Negro Leagues as well. So it's been really great being here with you today, and I do want to end with a quote that comes from Buck O'Neill, who was a player manager in the Negro Leagues for many, many years and was really known as being the quintessential ambassador of Negro League baseball until his passing several years ago. And this quote, I think, summarizes the feelings of Buck and my father and all the Negro League players that I've met through the years. These were not bitter people. They knew they were born at a different time and that life was just the way it was for them. But Buck's quote is beautiful, and it says this: "Baseball fulfilled me like music. I played most of my life and I loved it. So waste no tears for me. I wasn't born too early. I was right on time." Yes. So Daryl, thank you for having me here today, and it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. And keep the spirit of the Negro Leagues alive, everybody.
Downtown Leesburg, Beacon is a nonprofit liberal arts school and America's first accredited baccalaureate institution dedicated to educating neurodiverse students with learning disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, and other learning differences. The Peterson's College Guide currently ranks Beacon College #1 school for educating students with learning disabilities, as does bestvalueschools.com. Here's a quick tour of Beacon College. For more information about the college, visit our website at beaconcollege.edu. So, it's about that time. Do we have any questions out there? And do we have the man who can answer them? Byron, are you there?
Hey, Daryl, how are you?
I'm doing great this evening. How are you, Byron?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to see if there is anybody out there right now who has any questions for us.
Okay. I'm here to answer if they do.
Absolutely. Also, if you are watching and you are a part of the Q&A and you have a question, please make sure that you pose your question in the Q&A section. All right. Well, we'll see. We got some shy folks out there so far this evening. Byron, well, tell me, how did you, when did you first start working on your documentary? the Negro League, and we found out about the Leesburg Spiders, but there wasn't a whole lot of history to find about them. Did you find that in doing your research that there was only scant information about some of these teams that played?
Yeah, a lot of that was really because they didn't realize they were making history. And a lot of times the press would follow the black teams around, or the black teams wouldn't hire a local press person to cover a game. So a lot of that history got lost. So it's estimated how many home runs Josh Gibson got, or estimated how many bases were stolen by Cool Papa Bell, or wins and losses by Satchel Paige, because not every game was recorded. So there would have been a lot more activity maybe around the Leesburg area, especially being close to Orlando or some other larger cities. There definitely would have been more activity around that area back in the 30s and 40s for sure. I do know that one former Negro League player played in Leesburg with one of the minor league affiliates. His name was Mr. Hare, William Hare. He's passed away a few years ago. But he played in the Negro Leagues and graduated to the minor leagues, which is actually a team right there in Leesburg. So there's definitely some history and activities that took place around that area back in the day. So if you did a little bit more digging there, you might find a little bit more. So
well, I'm going to take your advice for sure.
Yeah, check your local library or something like that. They will probably have some old microfilm or something.
Morris has a question about why has there been a decrease in black players in the majors?
Well, it's been explained to me because most of the young black kids now like more fast action, more fast-paced sports like football, like basketball. And baseball is a little more laid back. It's a little bit more, it's kind of old-timey. It's not as fast-paced. So that's one reason why it's explained to me. Another reason explained to me several years ago was that in the inner city, they're not the ball fields like there used to be. Like when I was growing up, there was a ball field everywhere. You go drive a few blocks, you see a ball field. But with people building houses and buildings that don't need to be built, that takes away from the infrastructure of the inner cities where you used to have these baseball diamonds. So a lot of kids weren't exposed to baseball. But that's changed now. There's more blacks, I think I've read recently, that are coming into Major League Baseball. But one thing I always stress when people bring that up, well, there's not as many blacks in baseball now. I always bring up the point that the Latin American players who are playing in the majors now, and there are goo-god of them in the majors now, they are all, as I said in the presentation, they are byproducts of the Negro Leagues, because back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, Latin American players could only play in the Negro Leagues. They could not play in the major leagues. So the Latin influence in the major leagues right now is because of what the Negro Leagues represented for them as well. So Jackie Robinson paved the way for black players, Latin American players, the players that come from Japan, Korea, all these other, any player of color in the majors now are part of what the Negro League stood for back during the time of segregation. So the Negro Leagues is represented by those players as well.
Great. All right. Well, I guess we'll continue our chat then. So I understand that you have another project going on with a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Byron?
Yeah, I through the prompting of a friend of mine, recently I launched a podcast, and it's been a fun journey. It's recapping a lot of the interviews I've done in the past. So far we have 8 episodes. The podcast is entitled The Negro Baseball Leagues, Chatting with the Legends, and it's on all podcast platforms, so I encourage you all to go out and check it out. It's really a lot of fun, and it's interviews, my reflections, my interviews with certain players, and then the player talks about, I play portions of the interview clips, and it's gotten great response, and I encourage you to like it, to subscribe to it, and to share it. So, the Negro Baseball Leagues, Chatting with the Legends is the name of the podcast.
Great. Any questions, Ron? think we've got a long one.
Okay.
Well, he's
So social responsibility, what is the obligation for the rich athletes to donate more of their money to the needs of the disadvantaged youth? So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't like to dictate what people should do with their money, but it would be nice if, each major league player, period, they're black, white, Latino, whatever, they gave a little bit back to their certain communities that have helped pay those salaries. I know that a lot of the Latin American players have parlayed some of their monies back in their communities in those countries, especially Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. So I think a lot of the players do something. I know a lot of them have foundations that represent a lot of across generation, across reflection of other things outside of baseball. So I think it's important that they give back. But like I said, I don't tell anybody what to do with your money. Your money is your business. But if you're going to give something back to the Negro Leagues and those communities, that's great. I am thrilled that Major League Baseball has stepped up to the plate in the last couple of years and has given about $2 million to the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City. That's long overdue. So I think that coming down from the top from Major League Baseball is, for me, more important than what an individual might do to show that this is something that they realized that they screwed up on 100 years ago, up until Jackie Robinson, and they're trying to get back a little bit now. $2 million is that's a good chunk of change for the museum to know they're going to have their doors open. And I think Major League Baseball will always be behind them, which is a good thing. So, hope that answers your question. Satisfactory.
Well, let me ask you this one. In your presentation, you talked about how Jackie Robinson, how he was picked, that he wasn't necessarily the best player they had in the Negro Leagues, but because of his pedigree, he was the one they chose. In your research in talking with former players, was there any animus against Jackie Robinson because he got the shot even though he wasn't the best, and maybe some of these better players never got a shot?
Truly and honestly, the players I talked to, not a one. Matter of fact, they all said they were glad that it was Jackie because they had, in them, they would have shot or killed somebody. They said, because Jackie could take that nonsense. He said, I wouldn't have taken it. The other players I talked to said, there's no way that I could have took what Jackie took. So they all were in awe of Jackie. Put up with those racial taunts and slurs and the black cats being thrown in the field, all that nonsense he had to put up with. So they were very good. And so they were glad that he was the one who was chosen. He was the right man for the job. Nobody else could have or would have put up with that. So Jackie was chosen with purpose, and the foresight that Brad Rickey had in choosing Jackie to be that first person is quite incredible that he chose the right person. Because, like I said, anybody else would not have. It would have been a failed attempt at integrating baseball.
Great.
We have a question about the boycotts. The current basketball players are boycotting, sitting out. He's asking your thoughts on that. Can you be specific on what they can achieve by sitting out these games and boycotting, if you have some thoughts on that?
I don't know. I don't really know if I have what my opinion means to that. But I think it's a great gesture they're doing that. I think it's a great gesture that the opening day of Major League Baseball this year, that every Major League team had Black Lives Matter in the back of the mound, the pitching mound. A lot of the players knelt, white and black and Latino, they knelt in honor of those people who've been, in honor of the Black Lives Matters movement. So I say anything that supports progress, us moving forward and not going back. So if it takes kneeling, if it takes marching, if it takes whatever it takes, as once Malcolm X once said, by any means necessary. So whatever that takes to move this country forward without going back to foolishness, then I say, I'm all for that. So.
And let me remind you, viewers, if you have a question, pose it in the Q&A section and not in the chat section, please. So Byron, here's another question. This one's kind of a weird one. So I've been a fan of Negro Leagues.
Say if you're gonna wear it, you're gonna have it in your home, you have a bobblehead, know about who that who's that represents, what does that mean? What did that player, how great was he, how mediocre was he? Just know about what that is.
Great.
So we do have a question. Why were the Philadelphia Phillies so hard on Jackie? And which were the really bad teams? Also, which were the really good teams? And what are your thoughts on that?
So now you're stopping with this one. I know that the Phillies were harsh on him, but I don't know all the details of that. My expertise more is in the Negro Leagues and not so much focused on Jackie. There's so much information about Jackie and other historians are covering him, so I don't know that much about him. I think the Phillies were the ones that threw the black cat, if I'm not mistaken, of the field. So I really can't answer that with any super intelligence to impart to your way. So I will. I thought you were going to ask me actually about the Philadelphia Phillies back in the 1930s. The owner of the team at the time, who was Bill Beck, I believe, who later went on to own the Chicago White Sox. Well, he owned the Phillies back in the 1930s, 1938 to 39, and he was going to buy he was going to buy the Phillies. That's what he was going to buy the Phillies in 1938, 39, and stock it with all black players from top to bottom. And Major League Baseball was like, oh, no, you must be crazy. We're not letting you in our league. And they denied him ownership. And so eventually later, back in the 40s, before he bought the not the Chicago White Sox, he bought the Cleveland Indians. And he did integrate 47 with Larry Doby and Satchel Paige. He got his dream come true to integrate. He was 10 years ahead of his time, planning to integrate with the Phillies back in the 30s. So I thought that's the question we were going to ask me, but I went the roundabout way of answering an outside the box question. So.
No more? Okay. Well, I want to piggyback on his question there. Were there any dynasties in the Negro Leagues, or was it basically every year there was a new champion to emerge?
No, there was a couple of dynasties. You have the Kansas City Royals, who were the Kansas City Monarchs, who were the predominant team in the Negro Leagues. They won the most championships. They were the New York Yankees of Negro League baseball. You had the Homestead Grays, who had players like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige. And these players, guys like Satchel Paige, hopped around the team, but Homestead Grays were a great franchise. You had the I can't think of the name. But of course, you have the Newark Eagles, Effa Manley's team, who I talked about during the lecture. And there's another really great team on the East Coast. It's the Homestead Grays and my brain just missed that on that. But those are the most recognizable teams and the most successful franchises. And then you have the Indianapolis Clowns, who came in a little bit later in the 1930s. But that team went up until the 1960s. They were like the last team, 1964, they were still barnstorming throughout the country. So that franchise lasted a long time. So those were probably your, other than one I'm missing, Homestead Grays and the East Coast. Pittsburgh Crawfords, the Pittsburgh Crawfords. So those are the most dominant franchise. Yeah. Kansas City Monarchs, Homestead Grays, Pittsburgh Crawfords, and the Newark Eagles. And then you could add in the Indianapolis Clowns to that mix as well. But all these teams are great. There was a smattering of players from each team that could have been a Hall of Fame, from what I understand. There's probably, let's say, 30 total Hall of Famers in the Hall of Fame now. Some are players, some are owners. But there's probably more that actually were Hall of Fame caliber that played throughout this 40-year history, without a doubt.
Any more questions? Oh, well, let me follow up on that one. As far as the Hall of Fame, I guess because of the inability to really record statistics accurately, I guess there is no hope for some of these players at some point being voted in based on reputation and the memory of people who actually saw these people play.
Well, in 2006, there was a committee formulated to select the top players to get into the Hall of Fame. Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, Monty Irvin, a lot of the other guys were already in. In 2006, this committee got together and they voted on selecting the cream of the crop. And they selected, I think, 10 or 11 players and 6 or 7 owners. So 17 people went in. I don't know the exact breakdown. But so those 17 went in, like they were players and owners. But people are still not happy that, like the Buck O'Neill didn't get in. It's a big argument now that John Donaldson, who's a great pitcher, who's kind of under the radar, that he probably should have been inducted as well. So there could be eventually more inducted. It depends what the Hall of Fame is. It's really kind of their decision. But like a John Donaldson could probably definitely get Minnie Minoso was also overlooked that year. He played for, I think, 40, 50 years in the majors. Not that long, but a long time. He played in the majors for like 20-some years. And was in baseball for 7 years. So, and there was a big stink that he didn't get in 2006 also. And it's sad that he and Buck both passed away like weeks after that. Because they were staying alive. Staying alive to get inducted, and then they didn't. They just left the planet. So, but maybe eventually we'll see what the Hall says with how much of an argument that comes up that people, they really want to get these people in there. Maybe the Hall will take another look and decide to induct them.
Was Jackie's wife of great help to him in facing the challenges of the major leagues? And if so, do you know any of specific ways in which she helped?
Can you repeat that question? I think I got part of it. I'm not sure if I got it all.
Jackie's wife, was she a great help to him facing the challenges of the major leagues? And do you know of any specific ways in which she really lent a hand?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've actually met Rachel several times and actually interviewed her for my documentary. And yeah, Jackie needed that strength to go home to tonight. Somebody to support him, absolutely. She was in his corner, and I think that he may have failed that test without her strength. That was his longtime sweetheart, and she was there beside him every step of the way. And she told me a really funny story that in spring training, that the first year in 1946 in Florida, that they, she said that they would get all these racial taunts and stuff thrown at them when they were out in the field or whatever. She said they would get home, and she said they would close the door behind them, and they would just fall on the floor laughing. She said, can you believe they called us this? They were actually laughing at what people were saying about them. So they turned it around where they could laugh at them and make fun of them, so it wouldn't hurt so much, probably. But yeah, the fact that they did that, and he had that shoulder to lean on to go through that experience with him, to be able to laugh at it when he got home, and kind of let it brush off of you. I think that was very important. And she was a great partner to him. And she's 90. She just had her 7th or 98th birthday, and she looks incredible. She looks great. And so yeah, she's an icon, and I think she was the perfect partner for Jackie, without a doubt.
Great. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, Byron, I think I'm going to let you go. I know you're 3 hours behind us over in Los Angeles, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time to answer some questions for us about the Negro Leagues. It's been a very fascinating and compelling presentation. Before you go, though, can you tell folks where they can find the new revised version of your book? And we'd love people to check it out.
Sure. It's on the company website, the publisher website, which is Skyhorse Publishing, or it's on Amazon, and just type in my father's name or my name, Byron Motley, Bob Motley, and the title will pop up. The new title is the Negro Baseball Legends. So that's the title of the new edition. Has a new foreword by Hall of Famer Dave Winfield, one by Bob Kendrick, who is the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum, one by my friend Dionne Warwick, singer Dionne Warwick, and one by Larry Lester, who is a predominant, very well-known Negro League historian. So it's got the photographs, has the chapter, has the updated material. So it's going to be it's really exciting. It's going to be a fun read for those of you who want to take that journey. Amazon and through the publisher website, which is skyhorsepublishing.com.
Well, thank you for that, Byron. And once again, thank you so much for your presentation. We wish you well with the book, and certainly we look forward to the release of your documentary sometime in 2021.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me, Daryl. It's my pleasure, and stay safe and be well. And everybody, don't forget always to play ball!
Thanks, Byron.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of our presentation for this evening, and we thank you so much for joining us for the Beacon Salon Speaker Series. And I want to give you a heads up for our next presentation, which will be on September 15th, featuring Garrett Graff, and he is the author of The Only Plane in the Sky, an oral history of 9/11. So we hope you join us then for that presentation as well. And once again, we thank you for tuning in to the Beacon Salon Speaker Series. I'm Daryl Owens. Good night.